So the Pelicans getting the road win against the top-seeded Suns last night. Huge game for Brandon Ingram. 37 points, 11 rebounds, 9 assists. That's good for 69.25 DK fantasy points. And the series is now even at 1. And if the series being tied didn't tell you that we might have a series, Devin Booker left the game in the third quarter with a hamstring injury. His status for the next game is unknown. So let's bring in DraftKings contributors Matt Meiselman and DK Nation's Chinmay Vaidya. So Matt, with Booker potentially out, like how does that affect the series? Also, that was hysterical when he dapped up that baby.
Yeah, maybe that's the only takeaway that matters is the baby and Devin Booker and their new budding relationship. Mm-hmm. But I think that I may have a different take on Devin Booker than most basketball fans who assume that the Suns can't win without this guy. I remember last year, the Suns had plenty of games where both Booker and Paul, specifically Paul in the playoffs, and then this year where both of them have been out, the Suns don't really miss that much when only one of their two guards are out. Yeah, if both were out, it'd be a problem. But the Suns have so many players who can do similar things that I think they get by the Pelicans regardless. I don't think they need Booker to win this series. And I think that they still would be favored against the Jazz or the Mavericks next round without him. So as long as they can get Booker back at some point, I'm not really worried. It's a hamstring issue. Maybe it could linger, but as long as it's not super long-term, I don't actually think it's that big of a problem.
Chinmay, are you in the same boat? Like you're not that worried about this?
I do agree a little bit. I do think Booker is still the best player on the Suns. And I do think they will have some trouble with the Pelicans if he is out for the rest of the series. But you look at how the path sets up, both the Jazz and the Mavericks are dealing with their own issues. And we don't really know who's going to come out of that series. So the Suns are still the best team on that side of the playoff bracket. Now, if Booker was out for the rest of the playoffs, then it would be a bigger issue going into what we think would be the conference finals against one of those teams, either the Warriors or the Grizzlies or the Timberwolves. So I think that for now, it's not an issue. If it was a long-term thing, it would be more of a problem. I do think the Pelicans are going to give the Suns a longer series than maybe a lot of people expected, especially if Booker does sit out for this series.
All right, guys, good stuff. Now let's get to tonight's big games in the Eastern Conference. We got 3 playoff games. The Boston crowd not available in DFS contests, unfortunately, but Kyrie Irving is. So who's your favorite DFS play tonight for game 2 of Nets Celtics? What do you think, Chinmay?
There's a lot of stars on display in this game, a lot of players that you can pay up for, but I really like Al Horford. He's at about 6,500 right now on DK, and he had 45.8 fantasy points in that first game. He's going to get a lot of run with Robert Williams still out for the Celtics, and Horford's that veteran presence that contributes in every stat column. And he showed why he is still considered one of the better front court players in this league, even at his advanced age. So I like Al Horford as a guy who you can maybe save some cash on and still get decent production from.
All right. What do you think, Matt? You could pay $9,900 for Kyrie here.
Yeah, I actually don't think anyone's really going to do it. So first of all, I just did a double take looking at that Al Horford box score again. He played over 40 minutes. That basically never happens. But as Chinmay said, they need it without Robert Williams. So this is a weird slate where I think there aren't value plays or there aren't cheap ones anyway. And therefore, no one's building stars and scrubs. You're going to see tons and tons of mid-range guys. So I want to stay away from Marcus Smart. I feel like Al Horford's a good answer, but the other way to go about this is to actually play a now contrarian, despite his amazing game, Kyrie Irving or Jason Tatum. So those are my 2 answers. I think you can play the studs on both sides of this game, play either Irving or Durant, play Jason Tatum, because the way I'm going to answer this next game after this, I think will set up where, maybe you can pay up in spots people aren't doing it and then pay down in other spots where people aren't doing it. Because I think that expensive players are going to come from some of these other games and not so much from Celtics Nets.
All right, take us to the sports book here, Matt. What's your favorite bet for Brooklyn, Boston?
Yeah, I'll just keep riding the Homer train. I can't make any other pick than Celtics, but the reason that I like the Celtics is not because I'm a Celtics fan. The reason I like the Celtics and I'm wearing this hat is because there's betting value. Like I've become a fan as a result of them being undervalued in the betting markets. That's actually what's happened because I'm from New Jersey. I'm not from Boston. I should be a Nets or Knicks fan, but now I'm a Celtics fan. And the reason it's just, this team is not getting enough credit still. And in this specific game, I think it's because the Nets almost pulled off game 1 And there's this idea that if just one shot went differently, they could have won that one. In game 2, they'll come back and they'll care even more. But 3.5 is just too low of a line. Like, the Celtics are 3 or 4 points better than the Nets, and they should be favored by about 6 or 7. So I just think this line is still off. I think the Celtics are the much better team. I think they're able to win this game more easily than they won game 1.
All right, Chinmay, what about you? Where are you going for this Brooklyn-Boston bet?
I'm actually going in the exact opposite direction. I like the Nets straight up in this game. I think Kevin Durant had arguably one of his worst playoff games of his career in that first game. And it was the turnovers that were really the problem. I think he cuts down on those. Boston has kind of understood that there's no way they can stop both Durant and Irving. And I think they're going to target KD more, but it's up to him to make the adjustment now. And I think in this game he does, especially after a bad game that he had relative to his standards. I still think they get enough from Kyrie Irving, and some of the peripheral players will need to step up. And that's definitely what KD, Kyrie, and head coach Steve Nash have told these guys, that, hey, we have 2 superstars, but we're going to need some other guys to contribute. They have those players. Now it's a matter of whether they'll step up or not. I actually like the Nets straight up in this game. You get some value on that with plus money odds right now. I believe it's at plus 140. So I'll take Durant and Irving in this one as well. To get it done. It was a close game in game 1, and I think Durant plays better this time around, much better.
All right, let's move to that 76ers Raptors game. What's your favorite DFS play for this one, Chinmay?
I have 2, both of them under 7K. They both have played extremely well through the first 2 games. Tyrese Maxey and Tobias Harris. You can't go wrong with either one. There's a lot of attention on Joel Embiid and James Harden, but I think that Maxey and Harris are the plays here where they're not exactly value plays. They're still kind of expensive, but you can get away with it's more of a mid-range play than a superstar price point for these guys. So I like both those players to continue having good series against Toronto.
All right, Matt, is this the spot where you're going to pay up for the Stars?
Sort of, but I think Embiid and Siakam are pretty good plays. But the guy I'm most interested in here, I think, is a player that people would have liked had he not had the worst game of his life last time out. And that's Gary Trent Jr., who we just found out is going to be available. He was listed questionable up until about 5 minutes ago. He'll be out there tonight, but he scored 0 points in game 2. The reason I like him is not because I think he has to do well now. It's more the pricing, where Al Horford and Marcus Smart, my guess is those are the top 2 most popular players on the whole slate. And Gary Trent is just below them in terms of price. And with recent performance going so much towards those Celtics guys, and it going so much against Trent, like he put up 0 points and 4 fouls in like 9 minutes. It was as bad as possible. And he might still be a little sick and not over the illness he was dealing with, but he also is a very, very high upside player where if he makes his threes, you could get a ton of fantasy points really quickly. So I like Trent as the pivot off those Celtics guys.
All right, Philly, Toronto. What's your favorite bet in this one, Matt? 76ers favored by 2.
So this will be a shorter answer because I sort of just gave away where I'm leaning here, but I think the Raptors can bounce back. A healthy Gary Trent will be a big difference over. I mean, it was like he was losing the game for them. He just had no business being out there for game 2. And it was a massive detriment just to have Gary Trent not playing well. It was only 9 minutes, but it went about as bad as possible for those 9 minutes. And I just think like going into Toronto is going to create a larger home court advantage than you normally get with the travel into another country. They're down 2-0. It's a must-win game. The Raptors probably still feel like they can get back in this series. And then Matisse Thybulle not being able to play just gives them that little extra edge. So I actually think Toronto wins this game. They're about plus 110 right now to win it. All
right, Chinmay, where are you going?
I do think the Raptors will play much better than they did in the first 2 games for all the reasons that Matt mentioned. But I'm still taking 76ers -2. I still think they're the better team. They've played better overall in this series. And Thybulle being out is a problem for the 76ers, but he hasn't really played that much in the first 2 games. And they've gotten offensive contributions anyway without Matisse Thybulle. So we'll see if that defensive, the defensive side is a problem for the 76ers with Thybulle out. But I don't know how much of an impact Trent Jr. will have coming back. He had a horrendous game, and he shouldn't have been out there in game 2. But we'll see how much he can bounce back. I still like the 76ers in this game. They will be in for more of a fight than in the first two games. I do think Toronto will play much better and it will be a closer game, but give me the 76ers against the spread still. They're still the better team, and I still think they get the job done here in game 3.
All right, Chinmay, let's talk about this Bulls-Bucks game. Who do you think is the best DFS play in this one? Giannis going to cost you $10,900. He had 55 DK fantasy points his last time out.
I think you have to go for Giannis in this one. And even though the price point is really high, he absolutely dominated the Bulls for basically the first half of that game before everybody started missing shots on both sides of the ball. So I think Giannis has another big game here. I think Budenholzer plays him more in this game after only having, I think, about 33 or 34 minutes in the first game. I think he plays Giannis more in this game. And I think he tells him to be more aggressive, especially if the Bucks aren't hitting perimeter shots like they weren't doing in game 1. So I like the Greek Freak here. And even though it's a high price point, I think there's enough mid-tier options across the slate elsewhere where you can pay up here for the guy who's going to create a big matchup problem for the Bulls.
All right, Matt, what's your strategy?
In theory, I totally agree. The problem for me is I don't think this game has that much of a chance to stay close. And I think Giannis will play really, really well. And I think the Bucks, like, unlike in game 1 where they seemed to forget they were in a playoff game at the start of the second half, I think this one they actually finish the job and go up 20 or so points in the second half. Maybe Giannis plays a ton of first half minutes and even third quarter minutes, and he may have a huge fantasy game up to that point. But I think we see some of the Bucks backups in this game in the fourth quarter, honestly. And the guy I like the most for that situation is Bobby Portis at 5,500. He's really the first man in for either Giannis or Lopez. And I think he does play the majority of garbage time unless the team's up 40 points or something. I think he would get extra run if the Bucks were up anywhere in that 15 to 25 range at the end of the game. So if you are trying to fade mid-range chalky players in other games like Marcus Smart and Al Horford, specifically Smart, I think he's the one everyone's going towards. Portis is a pretty similar price, and I think he makes for a pretty good pivot.
All right, let's get your best bet for this one. Matt, you said you didn't think it had a chance to stay close here, so maybe you like the Bucks to cover that 10-point spread?
Yeah, I'll be consistent. It would be very strange if I came back from that commentary and said I like the Bulls to cover plus 10. No, I'll take Bucks minus 10. I think they're just way better, and I think they should have covered last game, and they sort of just fell apart and still managed to win by, I think it was 6 or 7 points. This game, I don't think it'll be as close, and they probably win by somewhere between 12 and, 20 points.
All right, Chinmay, where are you going with your best bet?
I like the total here. I'm going over 225. And I think it's because both teams cannot possibly shoot worse than they did in game 1, especially the Bulls. And the fact that that game managed to stay close was a miracle in and of itself. I think both teams will shoot the ball better, play better offensively, and push this number over. I believe the total has gone over in 3 of the 4 regular season meetings, at least over this line, in 3 of the 4 regular season meetings. So I like it to go over again here. If this line drops a little bit, I think you're in an even better spot. So give me the over 225. I think both teams bounce back from a bad game 1 performance offensively.